Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. Last week I asked you guys what video you want to see next from me on my Instagram stories, and the vast majority of you told me that you want to see interview tips video. So that's exactly what I'm going to talk about today. In this video I'm going to discuss my 5 best tips that I always recommend for interview. I have been doing interview preps for a very long time, so I have talked to people who have interviewed in many different schools, and it's very exciting. It's one of my favorite things to do. I do believe that the interview is the most important part of the entire application process. There are 2 things that will actually get you in the door of the school. One is your personal statement. That's the first thing. That's kind of a pre-interview where you talk about yourself, where you kind of show your story, show who you are as a human. And the second part is the interview. Usually people think that the bench test carries a lot of weight. They think that the bench test is the decisive factor of if you will be accepted to a dental school in the United States. It is understandable because most countries actually put a lot of weight on the grades, on your GPA, and on your just general profile, all your stats, and on your clinical skills. That would be acceptable in different countries, but the United States really likes interviews. They really want to know who you are as a person because they really think of the schools as the community. There's a lot of extracurricular activities usually that requires you to be a good person, requires you to actually fit into the community of the school. So that's why they put so much weight on the interview, and that is most usual. It's unlike to other countries, so that's usually hard for foreigners to understand. So that is probably, if you take anything out of this video, take that interview is your most important, most absolutely the critical thing that you have to prepare for during your application process. So there are 2 different kinds of schools, and first type of school is a school that does actually put a lot of weight on your bench test, and they would have your bench test first. So that's kind of how you can gauge what kind of school this is. So if they have their bench test first, they are the school that would probably be not teaching you very much clinical skills. They would most likely just throw you into the patient work very quickly without much preparation. Of course, they will teach you something, but they will not focus their curriculum on teaching you how to prep teeth. They need you to know how to prep teeth, and they know that about their curriculum, and that's why their bench tests are so rigorous. So that is one type of school, and an example of that school is Buffalo. University of Buffalo has a very, very difficult bench test. It's 2 days, so there's a lot of things you have to do, and you have to pass it first before you even have a chance to go to an interview. And a different type of school is like a University of Oklahoma or BU, for example, or many other schools who conduct either just the interview and they don't have a bench test at all. Tufts does the same thing. They have kind of a small bench test, but it's not really prepping kind of bench test. But basically those schools care much more about your personality than your clinical skills. Of course, it's important to have good clinical skills, but all they're trying to find out with the bench test is if you can hold a handpiece at all. If you have ever prepped a tooth, basically, if you can manage to prepare a reasonable, clinically acceptable preparation, you will pass. So don't put that much importance in the bench test. Interview still is the most important part, even when you might have a question, but you just told me that like University of Buffalo and many other schools put so much weight in the bench test and they don't even have the interview before the bench test. That is true, that is correct. Good thing you noticed that. But their bench test, that even carries more weight onto the interview, because now that you had your bench test first, they sifted through everybody who's not good at prepping at all. So they took those strong clinical candidates. So now the only way to decide who they're actually going to accept out of this group is the interview. So the interview actually becomes even more important. It becomes becomes one thing that will separate you from the group of already really competent people. So that is even more important than other schools. So after all that being said, we understand now that the interview is something super important. That's kind of my first half tip. It's not a really official first tip, is be prepared. So you would be surprised how many people actually think that, well, I'll just wing it, it's just talking. I'm so good at talking. I'm very charismatic. So I'm just gonna come there and talk to the admissions committee without any particular preparation. That is gonna make you fail. That is a huge mistake. If you come in completely unprepared, not having your story, not having some basic answers to some typical questions that they ask, that's gonna get you failed. So definitely prepare. And that is, again, half a tip. That's kind of a common sense tip. But now let's begin and start with my first and very, very important tip that I do think got me accepted. So first tip is to be a creepy stalker. Basically, I can't recommend it to you on a daily basis. Don't do that all the time. But when you're trying to apply to the interview, go to the website of the school that you know you're going to interview at and open their faculty page. So some schools are good with that, some schools are not so good with that. So majority of schools will have a faculty page that will have pictures of all of their faculty. BU has it, Oklahoma has a good one, and those are the two schools that I went to, so that's why I'm telling you that they do. But they have very good faculty pages with a lot of bio, like who this person is and what does he do. So read all of it, memorize it. I printed it and took it actually to Oklahoma with me, and I was reading through their bios because I wanted to know who is going to interview me. So when I came to the interview actually, and the people started to go in the room, I was like, I know you, I know you, I know you, and I know you. I didn't know everybody, so there were some minor people who are not actually like faculty, they're like clinical advisors who were doing interviews, so I didn't know exactly who they were, but majority of the interviewers I could recognize, and I knew their interests, I knew what clubs they're in, I knew what research papers they wrote, so I can change my story to those people's interests. So I could make myself seem like I'm one of them, like I like the same thing as they like, because I already knew what it was. Back when I was applying to BU, and before I actually even got the interview, I knew where the admissions committee director lived, I knew what car he drives, I knew what liquor store he shopped. So I was really creepy. And how do you find that out? You start with the website, but then you go to Instagram, you try to find their Facebooks, you try to find their friends. If you don't find that, you go to the university's Instagram page and you scroll through them, and there you sometimes find pictures, and if they are tagged, you can go to their Instagram. It's a whole really creepy story, but it was the most helpful thing. For example, I had my interview in Oklahoma, and one of the interviewers was very involved in the American Women's Dentist Association, and I was not particularly, I'm not a very like feministy person, so I was not interested in American Women's Association, but you better believe that I told her that I did, and I twisted my story into the way that I had this YouTube channel and it came up a lot, but I was twisting my story and trying to say that I was trying to help women and trying to prepare for the bench test and like blah blah blah. I twisted the truth a little bit, and that's another half tip. Don't be afraid to twist the truth, you will need it, but we will talk about it later. So you adjust your story that is actually true to you, but when you know their interests, you become, it makes the conversation shift easier to what they actually want to hear. So that when I told her about this, my desire to help women and stuff, she's like, oh my goodness, why didn't you arrive here yesterday? If I knew, I would have taken you to our chapters meeting. So that was so helpful, and I did end up actually being involved in American Women's Association, so that wasn't a complete lie, but it definitely swung her decision towards me, and I do think I did pass that interview really well. So that's my tip number one, be a creepy stalker. My next step is to actually know your story. So that comes back to the part where I said that you have to be prepared, but that's not only means that you have to be prepared. You would be surprised again how little people actually try to answer the question, tell me about yourself. And that's when you would kind of give a short review of your personal statement about yourself. But the story that you're telling should not be a repetition of anything that you have said before. So when I do this mock interviews with people, and that's the first question I always ask, because that is the most popular question any interviewer would ask you in the interview. Tell me about yourself. And people would start telling me their resume. They would start telling me I graduated in 2013, I went to school for so and so, and that I know that. Believe it or not, I read your resume, I've read your CV, I've read your personal statement. I know that. So this is like, you start to drift off because you know what's the next thing is. You know, like when you're rewatching a movie and you already know what happens, you kind of you don't have to pay that much attention. So you have to present your story in a brand new way that they haven't read before. So how do you do that? Obviously, you have written it in your CV, in your personal statement, in many other aspects of your application, but you have to practice it a lot. So you have to think about who you are. You have to decide what are the major aspects of your life that you want to present to the admissions committee, and you have to practice it as if it was like a poem that you're trying to memorize. You have to repeat it every day. But when you repeat things a lot, it starts sounding rehearsed. And when it starts sounding rehearsed, that's not a great thing either. So your goal here is to present your story in a way that is interesting to listen, that doesn't sound rehearsed. It should sound natural. It sounds like you're talking to a person, but it still should be something captivating. So it should be coherent and structured, but you know, not boring. Basically, how do you do that? You practice a lot. And you talk to yourself out loud. Some people recommend recording themselves, but I don't think that's a good idea, because you actually, like, if you're not used to talking to a camera, like I am, for example, you sound really weird in front of a camera, and that kind of discourages you when you rewatch the footage. It's not gonna help anybody. But so just talk. So just try and tell this small paragraph of "tell me about yourself," your answer to that question, and you just repeat it over and over again, and you try to make it sound coherent, because when you actually come to an interview, and if you have repeated this story, it sounds like it's the truth, even if it's embellished a little bit. But you know how you get engaged, for example, and everybody asks you, well, so tell me the story, how did you guys meet, or how did you get engaged? You tell the same story over and over again. It doesn't sound rehearsed. Like, if you have jokes, people still laugh, but because you've told it so much, you already know what you're gonna say. So that should be the answer to the "tell me about yourself" question. It's very, very important first question. It's your first impression. It's your first step in the door. So definitely practice that. Another tip that's also extremely important is to ask meaningful questions. After every single interview, every single one, and I don't care where you're interviewing, they will ask you, do you have any questions to me? You should never say no. You should never ever say, I don't have any questions. You should always have questions, and they should be good questions. You should not ask anything basic that you can easily Google, or that you can easily ask that's on their website. You can like quickly look it up, because if you ask something that's so easy, like let's say, well, how long is your work hours? Or like, how many sessions are there in your clinics? Something like that, that's easily Google, like that you can find that out. So if you didn't find that out, then that's not real. Then it kind of shows them that you're not that interested, that you didn't do your research, that you're not prepared for this interview. So be careful with that. So don't fall into that pitfall of asking too simple of a question, but also don't ask too complicated questions. For example, something very specific, like what bird does your clinic uses? The interviewer may not know that. So that's something to stay away from, and to like also not fall into this pitfall of asking a question where she would have to say, well, you know, I don't know the answer to this question, because that makes them seem like they're stupid, and people don't like feeling stupid. And then she would have to tell you, oh, I will have to get back to you on that. I will have to research that. She will never get back to you on that. So that just a bad end of a conversation, especially if it was a good conversation. You don't want to end it on a bad note. So you have to ask meaningful question. What's a meaningful question? What you might ask. Meaningful question is something that makes the interviewer speak about them. The meaningful question is something that would start a new conversation after the first main conversation has been finished. So my questions were, I was interviewing in Oklahoma, and I was asking them, well, you know, I don't know much about Oklahoma. Do you love living in Oklahoma? Why did you move? What attracted you to the state? Do you have family? Does your family like living here? And that was particular to Oklahoma. You can ask it to any state, but that made the interviewer talk about themselves. It made them think, oh, I moved to Oklahoma like so many years ago. I love it here. I love this. One of my Oklahoma interviewers told me that there's this amazing symphony orchestra that comes to Oklahoma every year, and he loves going there. And that started conversations like, oh, you like music? I play guitar and I play many musical instruments. And we started talking about musical instruments. So that started a brand new conversation. So we went completely over time. But the point of this is that I asked a question that started a new conversation. That was a meaningful question. And it doesn't even matter what he answers. Like, you don't need to be interested in that. It shouldn't be an interesting question to you, because you probably already formed your opinion about the school. But the point of that is to leave a good impression. People love talking about themselves. So if you manage to ask a question that makes the interviewer talk about themselves, you just won a lottery, because now you brought this good memories to his mind. So now he will associate you with this good memories that you brought into his head. So that's just basic psychology thing. So that is, again, one of the very many important tips of how to nail your interview. Those last moments, that is what they will remember. The beginning is your first impression, and the last impression, those things will actually stay in their memory and they will get you accepted. Another tip that I have for you guys is don't shoot yourself in the foot. Again, I say you would be surprised, because I was surprised, is how many people actually show their negative sides in their interview. For example, I was talking to one person who kept telling how negative he was all the time. He kept telling, like, yes, I was such a pacifist. I had such a negative out view to life, but then I switched, and the dental school made me realize that. But why do you tell them first that you're such a negative person? So, you know, if you are, let them make that decision. Like, why do you have to, like, out of the blue tell them that I'm such a negative person? Or for example, why would you say that I've struggled so much with the application, my dental school was so difficult? So you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're telling them that your first dental school was incredibly difficult. So what makes them think that this dental school will be easy for you? So you're a bad student. So a lot of people actually, you know, they try to paint their story in a more colorful way, like they're trying to bring emotions into it. They try to talk about their struggles to make themselves look more presentable, they think. But when you talk about your struggles that much, when you talk about how negative and how difficult your life was, that sometimes gives you a very negative view. So you kind of show yourself as somebody, you know, who is not likable. So you tell them about your negatives, your minuses. So be very careful with that. And to bring in kind of piggybacking on that is sometimes interviewers, very old-fashioned interviewers, and it's really rare, but the interviewers may ask about your weakest points, your strongest point and your weakest point. So tell me about your weakest character trait. And people start telling their weakest character traits, like, guys, what are you doing about? What are you talking about? So if I asked, well, it's a common question, so I do ask that during our interview preps. And people start telling me, you know, like, I really can't get up in the mornings. I'm not a morning person. I can't, you know, I keep skipping classes. It's really difficult for me. And they stop. Like, you should really have prepared the answer to questions about your negative traits, because if you tell them a negative trait and you stop, then you just told them something bad about yourself. That's shooting yourself in the foot. So definitely prepare an answer. A, don't talk about out of the blue randomly without being asked about bad things about your personality, because people do that. And B, have a good prepared answer to the question of what's your weakest trait or what's your weakest point or anything about your negative characters. Because if you leave it hanging like this, if you tell them this is my weakest point, this is what I'm weak at, then you don't give, they think you're weak at that, you know, you didn't give them any redeeming points about yourself. If you do answer to this question, if you are getting somebody really weird and really old-fashioned who would ask you that question, then you would have to get something positive right away. So basically, if you say them, I can't wake up in the mornings, you know, I'm definitely not a morning person, I was late to every class, but there should always be a but, and then you bring something positive of how do you fix that. So I can't wake up in the morning ever, like, it's impossible for me, but I have worked so hard on myself that I set 74 alarms on my phone and I made myself get up every morning, and I was never once late to class. Then you showed that you are resilient, that you are fighting your own issues, that you just told them a negative, but then you turned it into something really positive. So that's how you answer that question, and that's how you show yourself, that's how you don't shoot yourself in the foot, basically. So don't shoot yourself in the foot. And another tip that I have is simply be likable. Be a good person. So there are so many people who have a ton of experience, who are amazing clinicians, who have been doctors for a very long time, who really have a lot of accomplishments, have so many things to be bragging about, but they either do a lot, they are either so arrogant that they're just unlikable. I don't like you. Like, some people come to the interview and they tell, or write in their personal statement for that matter, I am the best doctor. American medicine is nothing without me. I am absolutely incredible, and I want to be a teacher because without me, the school is gonna fade. So I did actually read a personal statement like that, not joking. But the point of that is when you present yourself like, I am the greatest, which people try to do, that is your point, to present yourself as, to sell yourself as the greatest. But don't tell them that. let them make their own decisions. So your job is going to be to present yourself in a bad way, but be subtle about this. Don't actually scream it off the rooftops, because you come off like a complete douchebag. You come off very arrogant. You come off as somebody who you don't want to work with. Because think about it, most of the times people they're accepting only very small groups of applications. So there are 12 students in a class. So all of these professors will have to work very intimately with each and one of them. So why would you accept somebody who is such a snake, like such a disgusting person, such a snake, so unlikable, that you actually don't want to, you don't want to work with them? So what's the point? Like, why would you accept somebody like that? You would accept somebody who you like, whose personality you enjoy. So be careful with that. Even if you are amazing and you do want to present yourself in the best way, try to be a little bit subtle. And weirdly, a lot of oral surgeons do that. I don't know why. I mean, oral surgery is really cool, but like, come on guys. Like, a lot of oral surgeons, they think that they're the best of dentists, and they think that they should tell that to the world. You're pretty cool, not gonna lie, like oral surgery is awesome, but just be a little more subtle, be a little more likable. And the other side of this be likable story is the people who are just so shy and they feel like they cannot present them, they don't deserve to present themselves in a positive way. So the other thing is correct. So they're trying to actually diminish their qualities. So they are not presenting themselves as somebody who is, going to be liked. So they're like, oh, you shouldn't, it's okay. Like, yeah, I have a 4.0 GPA, but that's not a big deal. I'm sure you have other candidates who are better than me. So that's kind of another side of that. So definitely try to be subtle, but proud of what you achieved. And then you're going to definitely present yourself in the best way. And I have talked for a very long time now, so that is all I have to share for today. If you have any more questions, and if you want to suggest a next idea for my next video, go over to my Instagram and you can suggest your video ideas for the future. And also, if you would like to have a mock interview with me, DM me on Instagram or email me, and I will put my email address somewhere on the screen so we can discuss how much that's going to cost and what's a good time for us to meet. So I hope this helps you guys. You definitely asked me to talk more about the interviews. I hope this was sufficient, and stay tuned for my future videos. Have a wonderful day, you guys. Bye.